18 spectacularly wrong predictions made around the time of the first Earth Day in 1970. Expect more this year. In the May 2000 issue of Reason magazine, an award-winning science correspondent, Ronald Bailey, wrote an excellent article titled Earth Day, Then and Now, to provide some historical perspective on the 30th anniversary of the Earth Day. In that article, Bailey noted that around the time of the first Earth Day in the 1970 and the years following, there was a torrent of apocalyptic predictions, and many of those predictions were featured in his Reason article. Well, it's now the 47th anniversary of Earth Day, and a good time to ask the question again that Bailey asked 17 years ago. How accurate were the predictions made around the time of the first Earth Day in 1970? The answer? The prophets of doom were not simply wrong, but spectacularly wrong, according to Bailey. Here are 18 examples of the spectacularly wrong predictions made around 1970 when the Green Holy Day, also known as Earth Day, started. Number 1, Harvard biologist George Wald estimated that civilization will end within 15 or 30 years unless immediate action is taken against problem facing mankind. Number 2, we are in an environmental crisis which threatens the survival of this nation and the world as a suitable place of human habitation, wrote Washington University biologist Barry Commoner in the Earth Day issue of the scholarly journal Environment. Number 3, the day after the Earth Day, the New York Times editorial page warned man must stop pollution and conserve his resources, not merely to enhance existence, but to save the race from intolerable deterioration and possible extinction. Number 4, population will be inevitably and completely outstrip whatever small increases in food supplies we make. Paul Ehrlich confidently declared in the April 1970 issue of Mademoiselle, the death rate will increase and at least 100 to 200 million people per year will be starving to death during the next 10 years. Number 5, most of the people who are going to die in the greatest cataclysm in the history of man have already been born, wrote Paul Ehrlich in the 1969 essay titled Eco-Catastrophe. By 1975, some experts feel that food shortages will have escalated the present levels of world hunger and starvation into famines of unbelievable proportions. Other experts, more optimistic, think the ultimate food population collision will not occur until the decade of the 1980s. Number 6, Ehrlich sketched out his most alarmist scenario for the 1970 Earth Day issue, The Progressive, assuring readers that between 1980 and 89, some 4 billion people, including 65 million Americans, would perish in the Great Die-Off. Number 7, it is already too late to avoid mass starvation, declared Dennis Hayes, the chief organizer for the Earth Day in the spring 1970 issue of The Living Wilderness. 8, Peter Gunter, a North Texas State University professor, wrote in 1970, demographers agree almost unanimously on the following grim timetable. By 1975, widespread famines will begin in India. Those will spread by 1990 to include all India, Pakistan, China, and Near East Africa. By the year 2000, or conceivably sooner, South and Central America will exist under famine conditions by the year 2000. 30 years from now, the entire world, with the exception of Western Europe, North America, and Australia, will be in famine. In January of 1970, Life reported scientists have solid experimental and theoretical evidence to support the following predictions. In a decade, urban dwellers will have to wear gas masks to survive air pollution. By 1985, air pollution will have reduced the amount of sunlight reaching Earth by 1.5. Ecologist Kenneth Watt told Time that the present rate of nitrogen buildup, it's only a matter of time before light will be filtered out of the atmosphere and none of our land will be usable. Barry Commoner, number 11, predicted that the decay of organic pollutants would use up all the oxygen in America's rivers, causing freshwater fish to suffocate. Number 12, Paul Ehrlich claimed in predicting in 1970 that air pollution is certainly going to take hundreds of thousands of lives in the next few years alone. Ehrlich sketched a scenario in which 200,000 Americans would die in 1973 during smog disasters in New York and Los Angeles. Number 13, Paul Ehrlich warned in May 1970 issue of Audubon that DDT and other chlorinated hydrocarbons may have substantially reduced the life expectancy of people born since 1945. Ehrlich warned that Americans born since 1946 now have a life expectancy of only 49 years and predicted that if current patterns continued, this expectancy would reach 42 years by 1980, when it might level out. Note, according to the most recent CDC report, life expectancy in the U.S. is 78.8 years. Number 14, ecologist Kenneth Watt declared by the year 2000, if present trends continue, we will be using crude oil at such a rate that there won't be any more crude oil. You'll drive up to the pump and say, fill her up, buddy. And he'll say, I'm very sorry, there isn't any. Number 15, Harrison Brown, a scientist at the National Academy of Sciences, published a chart in Scientific American that looked at metal reserves and estimated humanity would totally run out of copper shortly after 2000. Lead, zinc, tin, gold, and silver would be gone before 1990. 16, Senator Gaylord Nelson wrote in Look that Dr. S. Dillon Ripley, a secret of the Smithsonian Institute, believed that in the 25 years, somewhere between 75 and 80% of all the species of living animals will be extinct. Number 7, in 1975, Paul Ehrlich predicted that since more than 9/10 of the original tropical rainforest will be removed in most areas within the next 30 years or so, it is expected organisms in these areas will vanish with it. And number 18, Kenneth Watt warned about pending ice age in a speech. The world has been chilling sharply for about 20 years, he declared. If present trends continue, the world will be about 4 degrees colder for the global mean temperature in 1990, 11 degrees colder in the year 2000. This is about twice what it would take to put us in an ice age. Let's keep these spectacularly wrong predictions from the first Earth Day 1970 in mind when we're bombarded in the next few days with media hype and claims like this from the 2017 Earth Day website. Global sea levels are rising at an alarming fast rate, 6.7 inches in the last century alone and going higher. Surface temperatures are setting new heat records about each year. The ice sheets continue to decline, glaciers are retreat globally, and our oceans are more acidic than ever. We could go on, which is a whole other problem. The majority of scientists are in agreement that human contributions to the greenhouse effect are the root cause. Essentially, gases in the atmosphere such as methane and CO2 trap heat and block it from escaping our planet. So what happens next? More drought and heat waves which can devastating effects on the poorest countries and communities. Hurricanes will intensify and occur more frequently. Sea levels could rise up to 4 feet by 2100, and that's a conservative estimate among experts. Reality check, inconvenient facts from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's annual report for 2016. We're actually in the longest major hurricane drought in U.S. history of 11 years and counting. Last major hurricane, Category 3 or stronger, to make landfall in the U.S. was Wilma. The major hurricane's drought of more than 11 years surpassed the previous record of 8 years from 1861 to 1868, when no major hurricane struck the coast of the United States. On average, a major hurricane makes landfall in the U.S. about once every 3 years. The frequency of hurricanes in the U.S. has been climbing. See top chart above. These shows the hurricane count, all categories 1 to 5 in the first 7 years of each decade, back to the 1850s, based on NOAA data here. In the 7 years between 2010 and 2016, there were only 8 hurricanes, all category 1 and 2, which is the lowest number of hurricanes during the first 7 years of any decade in the history of NOAA's data back to 1850. It is also far lower than the previous low of 14 hurricanes during the period from 1900 to 1906. What you probably don't hear about the Earth Day supporters is the amazing decarbonization of the United States over the last decades or so, as the falling CO2 emissions in the bottom chart above illustrate, even as CO2 emissions from the energy consumption have been rising throughout most of the rest of the world. Energy-related carbon emissions in the U.S. have been falling since the 2007 peak and were at the lowest level last year in nearly a quarter century, going back to 1992. And the environmentalists and the Earth Day movement really have very little to do with this amazing greening of America. Whether it is mostly because of a hydraulic fracturing and the increased substitution of natural gas for coal as a fuel source for electric power. See related CD posts here. Finally, think about this question posed by Ronald Bailey in 2000. What will the Earth look like when Earth Day 60 rolls around in 2030? Bailey predicts a much cleaner and much richer future world with less hunger and malnutrition, less poverty, and longer life expectancy with lower mineral and metal prices. But he makes one final prediction about Earth Day 2030. There will be a disproportionately influential group of doomsters predicting that the future and the present never look so bleak. In other words, the hype, hysteria, and spectacularly wrong apocalyptic predictions will continue, promoted by the environmental grievance hustlers.